In the Kuban, about 40 kilometers south of the city of Yeysk, on the shores of the Sea of Azov, there is a tiny fishing hamlet called Yasinskaya Periprava, which stretches around a grain elevator. We arrived there at the beginning of March in 1927. The sea was still covered with ice, with blizzards raging over it. Our hut was so enveloped with deep snow that in the morning you couldn't come out without a shovel, but it was warm. We heated it with kizyak, which was livestock manure dried with straw that we bought from the peasants. Finally, the winter cold passes, the spring sun brings warmth, and the steppe begins to revive. The feather grass becomes green and begins to grow vibrantly. The ice floes break up on the sea and are borne swiftly by the strong current. Swans fly in to nest in the reeds growing on the slip. Here is the haven for flocks of migratory birds as they fly further north. Tired and hungry, wild geese and ducks alight on the shoals. The noise of their beating wings and their tumultuous cries sometimes wake us in the night. My husband served as director of the Mankovo-Kalitinskaya Professional Technical School, not far from the town of Chertkovo. Someone had reported him for carelessly telling his partners during a late-night card game that
Dolgonosiki have become seated in the Kremlin.
In the Kuban region, certain small grain weevils are called Dolgonosiki. With their long proboscis, these insects bore out and eat the heart of the wheat grain, killing it. To the Dolgonosiki insult was also added the infraction that he, without permission from above, accepted the children of priests and kulaks into his school. It ended up that they extracted from my husband a signed agreement not to leave the area. He was to immediately surrender his administration of the school and, awaiting further action, was put under house arrest. My husband, taking advantage of the fact that no guards had been placed over him during his house arrest, climbed out through the apartment window at night, sneaked to the nearby Chertkovo train station, and before they could miss him, managed to leave to Yasinskaya Periprava. After a while, I received a letter from my husband. I was to go to him, taking the greatest of precautions. It was already difficult to find work, so we decided to go to the city of Mariupol. At this time, the existence of the new economic politics was ending, and although there were battles about the organization of farm collectives, the chastniki, hourly merchants, were still many at the Mariupol bazaar. Unemployment began to set in, and people had little money. My husband and I ate through the last bit of our monies. My husband searched for any kind of work for a long time, and when he was finally forced to report for registration at the labor exchange, they immediately arrested him, reminding him of the weevils. My 2 young children and I were left without means, and I without hope of getting myself a job. I was looking for work in factories, in offices, and on construction sites, but everywhere was the same answer.
No work, no work.
With the opening of the labor exchange, employment history records were introduced. The large hall of the labor exchange could no longer accommodate all of the unemployed, and in order to get to the registrar's desk, one had to stand in a queue for almost the entire day.
Do you have an employment record?
No, I haven't worked yet.
Where is your husband working? Come back tomorrow.
But I have hungry children.
I said, come back tomorrow. Next.
And the crowd has already shoved me away from the little window. So it was every day.
Mama, did you bring bread?
No, my little ones, I didn't have a job today.
So bring us some tomorrow.
This is how my children met me, almost every day. It came to pass that I met my friend Ola from my gymnasium, high school, near my home village of Frunivka. She was married with 4 children and had been living in Mariupol for a long while. Ola's husband was gravely ill and did not leave his bed. But they had built their own small house from adobe, that is, clay mixed with straw.
If you want to,
Ola told me,
come to live with us. We can find work here. Many Greeks hire whitewashers to whiten their barns.
I was elated about this occurrence and profusely thanking the kind family who had received me, took my children and our personal effects, and moved to Ola's home. I took on any work easily, cheerfully, and quickly became acclimated to it. The foodstuffs we earned were plentiful for us, and my children began to thrive. I was troubled that the work was only seasonal, and I had to plan for winter. Mariupol was a regional center, and our office was considered a regional one. The farmers who lived here, whether they had any livestock or not, were taxed with certain expected norms of meat production and had to deliver them to our depot. In addition, surpluses were confiscated, arrears were fined, and livestock was forcibly taken away from the evil defaulters, that is, those who could not bear to part with their little cow or goat. I actually witnessed a cow crying. An elderly couple was ordered to relinquish their only small heifer.
We
Said the old man.
cried the entire journey, and my wife kept hugging and hugging her Mashka, and she, as if she understood where she was being led, was crying too. Look, she is even now still crying.
The cow most certainly had tears streaming from her sad eyes. The elders kept embracing their little heifer. We all sobbed together, and then the bereaved old folks trudged 10 kilometers on foot back to their village. It was forgotten at what cost the Bolsheviks got their power. Now they were devastating all the wealthy Greek regions. Thus they removed the Greeks, followed by the Ukrainian Samostleniks and the Polish minority population. Anguish and grief were in every family. The PVHO Society was organized. They began to teach the population how to handle a gas mask and how to sprinkle sand in the attic in case of fire. The authorities always spooked us.
Be on the alert. The enemy is at the gates.
Everything became so repetitive and boring. The PVHO Society was not taken seriously, and everyone wanted these meetings to hurry up and end, impatient to go home sooner. Finally, the announcement was made to the entire city that in view of strategic considerations and from the experience of other cities, anti-tank trenches must be dug at the distance of a rifle shot from the city. Toward this purpose, every citizen of every age is directed, all who are in the condition to hold a shovel. In 1939, the Germans tore Poland apart within a few days and circled there like an evil whirlwind. The Poles retreated to the Russian borders looking for sanctuary. There, instead, they met their brothers' bayonets. 12,000 of the best Polish youth found their fate in cutting. Neither did Soviet Ukraine nor the other Soviet republics escape the fate of Poland. German falcons swooped down into our lands, raining death, disintegrating and sweeping away with fire all living things. The war had begun. Refugees tumbled in. Immediately as the first bombs exploded over Poland, in our city there was no bread nor any other products in grocery stores. For a quarter of a pound of margarine, I stood as part of a queue of 7,000 people and there were still the same number of people waiting behind me. The queue stood day and night without obtaining anything. There were no letters from the front. From there, as from the penal camps, access was forbidden. Allegedly, according to the government, via the mail, the enemy could determine the size of the army, and also news could cause panic amongst the population. Soon there were rumors that the army was scattering. Those who had fled said that prisoners of war were being taken, almost by entire regiments. In 1941, the city was soon surrounded by the Germans. An elevator of grain burnt in the port. It was set on fire by the Red Army themselves before retreating, not wanting to leave it to the enemy. The Germans would not have given any bread to the population in any case. From the very first days, convoys with Russian and Ukrainian wealth went to Germany. For 2 or 3 days, bread made with burnt flour from the elevator was still on sale, crunchy like broken glass. Then that stopped. Starvation began. Bloated people were already frequent, and there was no end to the beggars at the bazaar. Local money was already worthless, but it was still possible to exchange items for corn. Jews were still walking about freely, but they were already being registered. Our neighbor, old man Gorlin, knocked on our door. He said that the Germans had ordered all Jews to pack their belongings for a journey. The only surprising thing is that people did not evacuate when they could. The refugees, who were all referred to as Polish, warned the Jews, but they were not believed. Some of my Jewish friends said to me,
"But why would we go? We are not some kind of rich people. We labor all of our lives. Now we've sent our daughter, but we ourselves are not going to leave."
All of my coworkers had sent their children away, but they remained, perhaps due to fear of losing their employment. That very same evening, the Jews were led down the street into the military barracks. When we ran out of our gate, the first column had already passed our yard. At the head were the rabbis and the doctors with their families, and all of the Jewish intelligentsia. The elders were led, supported under their arms. The infirm were carried on stretchers, and the children simply walked with little bundles on their backs. Everyone walked very slowly. My children suffered greatly and cried upon seeing their best friend, Rusa Halperina. It is impossible to even imagine that the Germans would have killed 7,500 souls from our city, but over the next few days they got herded up, were shot, and their bodies were thrown into the very same trenches that we had dug for the city's safety before the influx of the Germans. A sinister, inhuman crime had occurred in history. Several people from our yard died of starvation, some from illnesses. The Jews were murdered. As for me and my 2 children, we were removed to Germany. At the Mariupol train station, we bid farewell to everyone forever. The Germans crammed us into our train cars until they were full to capacity, shut them, and locked them with padlocks. A German deserter was in a nearby cell. He had abandoned the front to return home to his sick wife and children. This soldier told us about the battles at Stalingrad, of the defeat of the Germans, that their army was broken and fleeing, and that half of Germany was already in the hands of the Americans. We stood in amazement, listening in silence, afraid to utter a single word. For all 4 years of our captivity, we still did not know anything about the front. We stood for hours in the corridor as we talked. We did not want to go into our cell, and strangely, no one forced us to go in there.